So I've been making films for over 20 years. I started out making observational films about people in my life that I, was interested in and following them and just being present and observing what they did. They were mostly short films. And then about 10 or more years ago, I started doing more essay films, films where my voice was in the film, kind of posing and then answering questions about life, meaning, science, and ethics, and happiness, suffering, and all number of subjects. So this film is sort of grows out of my last film, which is very much about. This one is really about their witness to the natural world that is suffering along with us. So I've been making films, and then also the last 20 years, I'm a professor also. I actually environmental classes at college. I think in North Carolina. So
it's very broad journey with filming. Watching the documentary, you learned that I have personal connection to the subject. I'm wondering if you can tell us about when you started thinking about making and kind of how has you started doing this project?
Yeah, I mean, it started when I just was there for a weekend, and I thought I was just going to make a short film about a group of folks who were like there at my godfather's garden. And then in that short weekend, or that weekend, I then learned about plants and of the rhododendrons, and that they had come from China, and that they had been brought back to China, and it just opened this world of colonial botany and how plants have migrated, various different kinds of ways. And I was really interested to learn more about China, and so this kind of was a vehicle to do that as well. So then I decided to follow the plants back to China and kind of follow that transnational migration as well. And so it took place over a number of years. I was first in China in 2018, and then my co-producer Meng Chi was going to China as well, off and on, but we were filming through 2019. And then, I mean, thankfully, we're finished by no longer going to China. Yeah. But I don't know if that fully answered. So the personal is very much a part of the film and was also part of my last film. So, I mean, I think that to some degree is just how I think, but also like communicate how organically I come to the subject, and what my very granular connection or familial connection to products. We all have some connection like that, and I think that draw people in as well.
So, talk a bit more about how does like research and more close up there. I guess how does it grapple with the history that maybe have having plants change plants?
Yeah, so I mean, as I show a little bit in the film, there is an issue, a sort of PR issue. Out of the 1,200 rhododendrons, one of them is this invasive rhododendron honeycomb that has really taken over. And so that's a real problem because most people are like, why would we care about this plant? There are these botanical gardens, the Royal Botanic Garden, which are slowly coming to terms or thinking critically about their relationship to why do they have to bring a collection of Chinese plants outside of China. It still feels like it's sort of, and they are starting to have dialogue, like public, their public materials. I don't know. But I mean, all I can say is that now, what it means is that there are these plants and there are these connections, right? So connections with scientists in China, scientists in Scotland, people collaborating, work together. So that's sort of like in my mind, like a quote good thing that might have come out of this history, right? This global like collaborations that are going on. And then in China, there's a lot going on, but it's very fragmented. So it's not really like federal. It's more province has their own initiatives, and there's kind of go. It's just I think people there sometimes find it hard to get momentum with the conservation efforts, and in the film are doing things creatively, like how do we connect with the panda bear, or how do we triangulate so that we can like get support. But it's a whole different like.
Time in China, or this like
It was.
in terms of like object, what are some of the
Um, I mean, I guess, I mean, what, I mean, so it's sort of practically one of the differences, of course, is that they're actually conservation in the native habitats plants are from, whereas Scotland is all, already displaced. So it's in garden context. What they're doing is like mapping out, squares in the landscape that they're going to come back to year after year and see, are there more plants, are there less, are they flowering at different times? So it's very much conservation, which is really in the location of the plants, and then trying to think, well, what if there isn't going to be this natural area in 50 years? How do we address that, right? And how do we develop in situ or near situ conservation efforts close by? Because it's practical across the world, right? Quite honestly, they're not as interested in collaborating as they, so there is certain kind of like, this is, for our plans, they're going to stay in the film, and we're going to sort of figure out how to do it. I mean, there's a lot. I think there's also a lot around the conserving natural areas, and there's been a development of a lot more parks, kind of national parks, some of which are available or open to the public, many are not. But there is a push towards doing more of that. There's traditions in states, like camping or national parks, more kind of like where you need a big hotel and you need a gondola. And so then the question is how much is that helping the natural world versus harming it? But it is important to get people engaged, right? Because the rate of urbanization in China is so enormous that like many people don't even have a connection anymore to the world, to the natural world, like their ancestors or their grandparents. So like how do we, getting people to care about plants, right? What ways are they getting with them? And it might just be the part. So.
on the way?
Yeah. Yeah.
What would I
I mean, I think in terms of having no deleterious impact on the natural world, then it is in these more artificial contexts, right? I mean, so botanical gardens, in parks, people having garden, I mean, people just have plants on their terraces, just having some kind of relationship with the process of the natural world of plants, plant biology. There's that, but then also how can people figure out ways of going out into the natural world, into nature, as low impact as possible? And I think at this point it's a volume, so it's kind of a little bit it's not clear how that's going to be done. It's not like it does it right? So there's that. And it's also, China is like becoming more and more affluent, right? So, I mean, 30 years ago, there weren't people who had kind of money and time to like be traveling around, and now it's very different. So that's another challenge, I guess.
so there's a bit wondering if you could talk a bit about how you chose to of them, and also participated in any of the field work that is shown in the documentary.
Yeah, so the choices, I mean, obviously my godfather was there, he was original architect, and then the Ian Sinclair, a horticulturalist, and all the people in Scotland are kind of connected through that group of rhododendron conservation folks. And then they in turn introduced me to some female conservationists in the film. And so when I went to China, we connected with her and filmed her, and then through an organization called Botanic Garden Conservation International, they connected with Dong, who's the male conservation biologist, like a different time, like in a purple coat at one point, bamboo. So those were sort of original characters, if you will. And then because I kept wanting to ask these big philosophical questions about nature and representing nature, how we can art be a way of like connecting people with nature and representing nature? How can we art and culture, poetry to do that? So then that's I ended up getting connected with folks who are more like philosopher, kind of academic type, certain part of it. And then Beijing mostly, and then Taiwan ultimately. And in terms of field work, I mean, I shot it. I mean, I filmed it. So like, I was there asking questions, running the camera. I didn't do any work. If that's what you mean. I was doing the documenting part of it. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned doing work with art and culture, and art and culture are I was wondering if you could tell us more about what exactly is the role of art and culture and like that better results, and what can you give us to use the power of art and culture for this purpose.
Well, I mean, I think that certainly the paintings, poetry that I put into the film, and the people who are working in that sphere, I think are a real. I think do a good job of arguing why that is so important, and that you know that emotional, historical, visual connection that I think is, I mean, sadly now in China at least, not really being focused on. Students aren't really learning about a lot of this stuff, right? So they're not necessarily shown these works of art. They're not necessarily like science study, literature or art are like very much low down the technical. But I think that in terms of, well, I mean, it's like, how do I put it? I mean, the effort it takes to just do an illustration of something, the way essence, if you will, of a thing or of an organism, that process of meditating on and reflecting on connects to you, right? So the act of art, on the other side, just the act of consuming it, it's also like this whole, I mean, there's an argument that made about like preserving that which is beautiful, and then you say, well, what about the plants that aren't as attractive, right? I mean, the rhododendron is a charismatic, beautiful plant, so you kind of want to be a little careful there because people tend to represent things that are more beautiful, right, versus the less so. But even that said, I do think that if nature is something that we have to like emphasize, respond to that, and they feel the sense of like value attached to that.
And about how on the knowledge, and for example, the way they were organized by. And I was wondering if you could talk about the decision to include that in here, and also about ways in which we could give credit and center traditional and indigenous knowledge in our scientific pursuits.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, this is something that I learned about making film, going to regions, learning that almost all of the people working there, except those sort of handful of European botanists, were local people, but also as people who were centered along and live along these borderlands, right? And so I wanted to represent that because that's what I was encountering. I mean, that's what I was like, the people that I was meeting, some of the conversation, Fong himself, the conservationist, very sensitive and aware of this fact, and himself in that region. So it's not like getting in from Beijing, lives like right here, in this region. And so so to some degree, in some of the people he works with are indigenous. So I think he has a perspective and a kind of politics around that, that I sort of learned about and then reflected on to some degree in the film. I mean, I think in terms of how do we do that, I think that's a really, really important question. Because it's like so central, right, to like how knowledge is transmitted, and also how who gets credit for what kind of a discovery. I mean, there's so much there. I don't have the answer, but it does seem as if in every scientific discipline course about that. You know what I mean? Like right out of the gate. Opposed to just taking for, as truth, like the origin.
I guess some of those of us who are avoiding were like more sensitive, so very
Yeah.
so what go to what a level, tackle the issue of the
I mean, there's obviously many levels. I mean, there's getting involved with organizations on a like a national or even international scale. But I mean, I think in terms of like, the work, for instance, in North Carolina that I've become more recently involved in, and this is perhaps more relevant in where urbanization is happening quite rapidly. I mean, I don't know quite what's going on at this point in the Bay Area, but that there's work to try to like habitats intact because a lot of farmland is just swallowed up by development, and that's not just bad for that particular tract of land, but it's also like the plants, and then the animals too, like their habitat is disrupted, right? So it's knock-on effects of this kind of development. So I think I've been trying to get involved at that level, on like the local level of how to like make sure that this land is not swallowed up in terms of places that have already been urbanized. But then it's like, how do people living in urban places is actually good for the environment on the one hand, right? Because tract housing is not good for the environment, right? So living just like that's not healthy either. So then in terms of living in the city, I don't live in a city. I mean, you probably know more than I, in terms of like how to bring back places in the city, plant trees, make sure that there's a tree kind of as large in like poorer sections of town as there are in the wealthier sections of town, right? Because that's like how people's health and the temperatures of they're in the summer. I mean, there's so much just on that level, just like planting trees, right? So those are like very simple questions.
for answering lots of and I guess focus section of learning personal level, what is it
question. I think, I mean, I certainly, I never made a film about the environment for this. And now, I mean, what I hope is that the film will get people to care a little bit more, and partly like by having this sort of common garden plan that like now maybe people will look at, the pine trees in their backyard and wonder, like where does it come from or what is its origin or is this endangered in its habitat or, just kind of get people to think a little bit more, right, about the plants that they're surrounded by and in that the hope is that then there might be some higher level of consciousness for caring about working with conservation, broad bigger conservation efforts. So I mean, I think that sort of my humble hope, and the other part of it is the whole China piece. So like when I started making this film, I mean, over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, our relationship with the United States, and this is an example of people who were kind of, or connecting, and this plan just was connecting them. And I guess if we're gonna like save our planet, we can do it together, right? So I guess I have humble hope that like this movie could have like some role in like fostering dialogue in that way. I mean, I mean, I think it will show in Peking University pretty soon. So, it hasn't shown in Taiwan, it hasn't shown in China yet. So I have that hope.
Very much for the poetic experience watching your film. As a former landscape architect, and really appreciated the close-ups of the ink painting. I don't think you showed the full painting, the close-ups. No. I really love that, and detail was very meaningful. The words preciousness and tenderness, fragility came as I was watching the film, and the personal story was very, very appealing. 10 times the amount of film that we see, or 100, or?
No, it wasn't a crazy, maybe like 60 or 70 times. So like how many extra hours?
60 hours.
60 or 70. I mean, I'm kind of, like I was laboring over it. I don't, anyway, roughly.
And how long would it take to edit film?
Well, I mean, having less film is helpful, right? Because you don't, nowadays, like, legal attachment, you can have like thousands of hours, so that takes a while to go through. So, I mean, depending on, what kind of staff you have. I mean, it was me editing, and then Meng Chi, my co-producer, she was a lot of the translating, and then like a lot of the subtitling. So it's, I mean, probably if I could have just done it straight, I could have done it in like a year or so, but it ended up extending over like more than like 2 years.
I just asked, how come it says foreign language rather than in?
Oh, okay. So I was thinking about this. So this is the captioned version. So this is captioned. So this is the distributor when selling the film is giving, closed captions. But the film I kind of made just has the language. I mean, it just has, the subtitles. So it was a little distracting. I mean, whatever, to see both of them. I'd never seen that before because I hadn't seen the caption version before. That was just a file that I gave to them. So that's why. I know, it was distracting. Yeah.
I have a question about your godfather. you know he was ill, or were you project, or was it more the end of his life kind of on me?
Yeah, no, he wasn't when I began the film. He was not. I mean, he was an older man, but he didn't have any immediate health issues that we were aware of. So no. I mean, I guess the answer is it kind of. I mean, worked out because it's like no, just like from a narrative perspective, there was that like poignancy that you know, it felt to me, or I felt this sense of attachment to the plants, and then the fragility of human life, attached to the fragility of this plant life, and then how the garden changed. So I, I don't know. I mean, I'm not doing a good job of answering your question. I would have loved for him to have seen it, and and Ian in the film, who is was actually married to one of his daughters, which doesn't get talked about. And he's actually was my mother's partner for 20 plus years. So this is someone I actually know very well, but like wasn't really, in my mind, relevant to the film. So Ian is very much involved with like getting the film out, and like we had this tour, as I was saying earlier, in Scotland in the spring, and he's been like a big kind of champion of the film, as you might imagine, so like the living legacy. Yeah. Oh. I know. Yeah, I'm struck with. Well, so yes, just to say that it was drone photography, and then when you realize that the horses are running because the drone is basically hurting them. So it's like the symbolic, a little bit, yeah. But yes, I mean, this is the thing. So my last one was about this French philosopher Simone Weil writes a lot about how do we witness human suffering, and she always tries to understand the essence of life. And she thought that two ways were through suffering, which is what she very much focused on. This is around World War II, for obvious reasons. And so that sort of really got me thinking in terms of this film, and how to like capture that beauty, and how to kind of help to bring people into the world, which is largely a visual, right? Largely visual, but the sort of transcendent quality of it. Um, so, as terms of education, I don't know. I mean, I am like along with my students in UC in North Carolina, haven't really had any environmental like education. So, but I haven't actually thought so much about the other, what you say about what they're getting educated, or how they're learning earlier about art. There's my dad. You guys. How long ago were you? Quite a long time ago. But like what, and it depends on where you go. But I do think that like that's also, it's messed up with some other conversations, like arts in schools, like funding, right? Like there's, a defunding of those activities. And it's really, really sort of devastated. Like I felt that when I was in China because of the ways in which the Cultural Revolution, there was a lot of back, in the 60s, there was a lot of like anger and rage and the history of, dynasty and the intellectual elites. There was a lot of like destroying of that in all those, like the paintings in Taiwan that I can see some of. Those were, some of them were brought because there was fear that they would be destroyed had they remained in China, in mainland China. And so now there's a way in which people are cut off from their cultural heritage, their artistic, rich cultural heritage, and that in the same way with indigenous peoples, the ways in which people's relationships, representations, and arts are so critical to people's identity and like sense of self as well. And anyway, so I just felt that sorrow around the loss of that heritage.
See that scene where the woman is saying we used to go to the mountains and have a cup of tea, but now they're taking selfies. Was that in Taiwan or was that in mainland?
That was in Beijing. That was in, yeah, and she's actually the professor who I'm going to work with and we're going to do a reading. So, yeah. Yeah. I think so, and I think that is the one silver lining, if you will. And also those photographs in the film, I mean, the ones that were taken 100 years ago, that were taken by these plant hunters, but are now sort of documentary evidence, right, that can document climate change or so that's sort of useful, right, in terms of like understanding how we're impacting the land. But yes, I do. It's globalization and it's in all of its intricacies, but that is one way in which there is a solution. Would not be otherwise. And whether that will ultimately, they're big organizations like this, Botanical Garden, Conservation International, which is an international organization of gardens from all over the world. So those are the kinds of organizations I think that, potentially like point towards like hope in some way, because I think that part of what I felt like in making the film, first of all, the work that they're doing, the conservation, is not sexy work, arduous, like, going back and like cataloging very like in keeping very intricate records, like it's not sexy work, but their work is allowing us to understand these kind of human impacts. And then also scientists who are actually continuing to talk to each other, like right where it's like politicians don't talk to each other, like different groups don't talk to each other, but the scientists, right, and we learned this with COVID, right, that people are talking across national lines around. That's sort of inspiring, because it's that we're gonna like not like shut down dialogue, we're gonna keep it going in the interest of advancing knowledge. So anyway, so I think that's yeah. No, it's been happening. It's been happening ever since. And, and that's not to mention, birds make, migrate, right? It's like, it's all sorts of ways in which plant matter is spread. It's and this is very intentional. not too deep, and commercializing, like this is about like developing plans to sell. Go back. Yeah. No, exactly, and that's with the earthquake. I mean, that's partly why I put that scene in the earthquake, because yeah, you have to have multiple exit sites in order to have the hope of being able to, yeah, eventually. But of course, fundamentally, it's like insanity that we have that we're doing this in the first place. But I guess it's like once you accept, like, I mean, the rate of extinction, as we know, the Andriuc epic that is many would argue after us in terms of our impact on the, the geologic and sort of extinction record. So I think those things, sort of coming to terms with that and trying on the one hand to keep some areas, intact, and then also trying to preserve, because it's like, do we want our legacy? God, and I don't mean to laugh. I don't mean to laugh at all. So, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to the Berkeley Library.
Yeah. Julia just happened to be in town this week.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh, please come down.
And thank you guys.
Yeah, it was a great. Oxana and Madison, again, on top of the science bubble. Video there.
And please take a postcard. There are postcards over there, so everyone can have one as well.